called the Naqshbandis, which tends to be quite conservative, which doesn't even, although there are differences again within that school, but the majority of that school, they don't even recite this prayer out loud. They recite it inwardly, themselves, silently. And in fact, members of that school often frown at other schools that tend to utilize music or dancing, because they say that perhaps that is not in consonance with other parts of the religion. So the diversity of Islam carries through even into these Sufi orders. But simply speaking, the whirling dervishes and the music that we've seen, that is actually the zikr or the dhikr, where they are conducting certain rituals to create an enabling environment for this religious experience. I've just put down the 3 points there for the wird, because generally speaking, the prayers that are recited follow this sort of a structure. So in the first part, as a mortal, we are constantly sinning, so we ask for forgiveness. In the second part, we ask for God's blessing to the Prophet and to grant him peace. And in the third part is where essentially we are focusing on God and trying to remember God so as to make room for God in our mind and in our being. So I apologize if some of this is a little bit abstract, but the subject is of that nature. So now, essentially, that in a nutshell is what Sufi Islam is about. I've given you an introduction to the fact that you can't be a Sufi until you join a Sufi order. There are initiation ceremonies that you go through. You have to have the normal practices of a Muslim embedded and imbibed in you in order to be a Sufi and to get to a particular place in this spiritual journey. And within the schools, there are rituals which are very formal. So these zikrs, they take place either collectively or individually, and generally both, at set times and set frequencies. So I can't just wake up and say, okay, today I want to be a Sufi and let me look up a prayer and start reciting it 30 times and then do, there's a very disciplined approach and disciplined manner in which a Sufi goes through their journey. And this is something that requires commitment, and hence the initiation ceremony is not just something that is taken lightly. I wouldn't say it's like joining a club or something like that, but in a sense, the orders do want to make sure that people are committed and that they have already demonstrated certain behaviors to demonstrate that they will continue on what is actually a very difficult path and not for everyone and not for all individuals. So this is, in a nutshell, what Sufism is about. But I wanted to also talk a little bit about Sufism and some of the contradictions, if I can use that word, that arise or purport to arise between Sufism and what I have termed conservative Islam, or people who sometimes view a more stricter or austere version of Islam. Firstly, I want to mention that today whether it's due to the media or due to some of the happenings that are taking place in the world, there's this belief that Sufi Islam is a way to counter austere religious Islam. That actually is a misconception, because as I've demonstrated or as I've explained, anyone who is a genuine and true Sufi is what to you and I we would consider fundamentalist, because they are already adhering strictly to the 5 pillars. So they're saying their prayers 5 times a day, they are doing everything that perhaps may be used to describe them as fundamentalists in certain societies. So it's a misconception to believe that they are in any way perhaps more moderate or so on and so forth. Having said all that, there are some differences. I talked about the Naqshbandi order as an example of being a more conservative order, and how the Naqshbandis don't necessarily agree with the idea of using music and singing to engender this religious experience. But broadly speaking, you go to any Sufi shrine or any Sufi saint's grave, or any festival associated with a Sufi sheikh or festival anywhere in the world, Pakistan of course being the one that I'm most familiar with, you will find that it is filled with music and filled with dancing. In fact, we have one Sufi shrine on the outskirts of Karachi, where the bulk of the followers of this saint are Negro, and when they have their annual festival, which is a big event, I think it lasts 10 days if I'm not mistaken, many of the things that they are chanting are actually in not in Urdu or not in Arabic, they're in Swahili, because it stems from their background from Africa. Now, so this acceptance of music, dance, chanting can be frowned upon by some. We also have this notion of a religious hierarchy in a religion which does not believe in a hierarchy. Islam has no hierarchy. So Islam doesn't have a pope. Islam doesn't have a clergy which is formally appointed by a bureaucratic structure that is paid salaries or that rises through the ranks in a particular way. And of course, what that also means is, I've used the word, and I've used it also in my presentation, saint. We associate the word saints with the Catholic saints because there's a formal structure, there's a way in which the Pope actually makes someone a saint, and there are, I believe, formal bureaucratic processes through which people are evaluated and their deeds are considered, etc. Well, I referred to this gentleman when I talked about the Swahili music as a Sufi saint. Now, what made him a saint? Well, the fact that many people go and pray at his shrine, and enough people went, and so we now call him a saint or a pir or something of that nature. But in Islam, there's no concept of saint, and so I have a relationship with God, and technically and theoretically, it's a direct relationship. I don't need to go through other individuals, and in fact I shouldn't have to go through. But we're all humans, and we do look up to individuals who have shown piety or who we respect in certain different ways, and certainly we have heard of individuals who have, I wouldn't call them miracles because that would be again somewhat sacrilegious, but who have had experiences ascribed to them that help individuals. So we know of certain religious leaders who perhaps are blessed in that they can help individuals who are in poor health, others who can't have kids, others who want to be wealthy, etc., etc. So there's this concept which flies in the face of traditional Orthodox Islam where you basically have near worshipping of an individual in a religion which expressly forbids that. And I would point to here Saudi Arabia, which we can easily suggest to be the geography where Islam is practiced in its most austere form. And in Saudi Arabia, perhaps some of you heard some of the Sufi musicians that have performed at the Esplanade. If you try and take CDs of those musicians into Saudi Arabia, they will take them away at customs if they find them, because they consider to be un-Islamic. Okay? Their king, when he dies and when they have died in the past, they are buried in unmarked graves because they don't want anyone to go to these graves to worship them. So at the other extreme, you've got this austere Wahhabi Islam versus the case that we have here, where individuals actually go to the shrines of these people in order to seek favors and blessings of God. So there are some contradictions and some issues that do arise. Sufism has been and probably will continue to go through some tumultuous times. It will not be accepted by everyone, and it will be overwhelmingly encouraged or accepted by other people. Sufism in the past, especially in areas where Islam was not rooted in the early days, Sufism has played a critical role in spreading Islam, because in a sense what it does is it gives role models that are positive, that adhere to a universal belief structure, a humanist structure, if you will. Again, I refer to some of the words and the concepts that were used by Sufis in spreading their beliefs. So if you're a Hindu or a Buddhist or an animist in Indonesia, or a Hindu in India, or a Buddhist in certain parts of the world, you can actually relate to some of the concepts that this Sufi saint is talking about without feeling as if you are giving up everything that you believed in. So Islam becomes a much more palatable set of beliefs for you. So Islam has in that, Sufism has in that sense been quite critical in spreading Islam and creating little pockets and beachheads which have then expanded over time to become more part of the mainstream. Not to suggest that Sufism is not mainstream, but it's certainly, I tried to actually find numbers of Sufis in the world today. I couldn't come up with an accurate number, but I will throw out what I came across, which is somewhere in the vicinity of 10 to 12 million. It's a tiny number when you talk about a religion like Islam. So certainly while it's part of the mainstream, it's still very much on the fringes as well as far as numbers. But it's certainly, in my opinion, not going to go anywhere. Republican Turkey under Ataturk, who, by the way, I'm a great admirer of, tried to ban and repress Sufism in Turkey, including the Mevlevi order or Rumi's order, and ultimately had to relent because it is quite deep-rooted in these traditions, and he couldn't succeed. So it didn't work there. Soviet Union tried to discourage these practices in what is today Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, etc., etc. They may have succeeded to some extent, but immediately after 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, everything just came back to life as if it never actually disappeared. So these belief structures, these schools, these orders, they were kept alive by certain individuals, and they just flourished immediately as they were given that lease of life. Today, as I sit here and as we listen, Sufism is again under threat by extremist Islam. We've seen examples, extreme examples. Sufi shrines are being destroyed in Timbuktu. They are being destroyed in Egypt, in the parts of the Sinai. Tunisia has also seen some of its Sufi shrines being destroyed. And of course, we all know that Pakistan has had its fair share of issues with Sufis and Sufi traditions as well. Having said that, I'm quite positive about Sufism and Sufi Islam in general, because as we see the Islamic world go through a period of introspection, which unfortunately means that we've got both the extremes fighting it out, Sufi Islam becomes a very attractive alternative for those individuals who are alienated by a lot of what they see going on around them in the name of their religion. Because Sufism is a fairly personal thing. It is certainly something that doesn't espouse violence or violent behavior, and it is something that all individuals can kind of say, okay, look, this is my Islam, and I don't really want to sully it with everything that's going on in the name of it, and I just want to get closer to my God and be a better human being and change my world. In fact, one of the quotations that I was going to use, but for shortage of time, was that when I was young, I wanted to change the world. Now that I'm wise, I just want to change myself. So, you know, that in a sense is also at the heart of Sufism. It is individual, but of course within a disciplined, organized structure. And as we've seen Islam develop serious pockets of minorities in other non-traditional Islamic geographies, Canada, the UK, US are the three that I've listed here. What we've also seen is Sufi traditions and orders. Actual Sufi orders have sprung up in all these three countries. So branches of existing orders are available to people who want to join them and who want to go through this journey in these environments. When I talk about branches and orders, I'll just mention one other thing. This concept of silsila, which is very important in the Sufi tradition. Silsila actually means story or connection or path, not necessarily path, but connection or story. And what it means is that for a Sufi order, traditionally, they are able to trace this chain all the way back to the Prophet and someone nearby the Prophet. So for a Sufi order, this chain, so when you join an order and you have a murshid or sheikh, that you are part of this silsila or this chain that ultimately can trace itself all the way back to a companion or someone nearby the Prophet. And that means that not theoretically, not everyone can just get up and form an order. So I want to here talk about the fact that I've been using the word saint and Sufi saint and in a sense implying that they are a Sufi interchangeably. But we have to understand that there's a fine distinction between someone who's a saint and a Sufi. To be a Sufi, you have to, as I said, ascribe to an order. You have to have gone through this school and undertaken these practices that the order describes. Some of these orders have explicit rules of conduct and behavior, such as I believe the Benedictine monks have. They have certain rules which anyone who joins has to subscribe to. But a saint, we commonly call him a Sufi saint, but actually he may not, or she may not necessarily be a Sufi. And there are lots of female Sufis as well. So it's not a gender biased thing. In fact, there are even some Sufi orders that are one or two that I have read about, which are led by females. So a saint is not necessarily a Sufi. So this gentleman that I talked about, the shrine where they spoke Swahili, he's a saint, not necessarily a Sufi. Okay? And we made him a saint, or his followers have made him a saint. But there's nothing formal about it. To be a Sufi, there's got to be a formal structure and an order around it. We use this word interchangeably, we have to be careful of that. So to end, I just want to talk a little bit about bring it home and bring it to Singapore. Singapore, of course, has a tradition of Islam and the Malayan archipelago, which is quite rich and which is also several centuries old. And we also have a saint. In fact, in this part of the world, there are several saints, but in Singapore, some people call him the Saint of Singapore, Habib Noh. You can actually visit his grave, or the maqam as it is referred to in Malay, which is just on the fringes of the CBD. And this shrine, if I can call it that, if you go there, his grave is there, and the grave of a very close companion. And there are people who are praying to his grave. They burn incense. They even leave water around it for it to be blessed. And this saint is very important to some segments of the Muslim community. Now, the oral tradition is very important for saints and for legends to develop. So I want to just share with you a couple of things that occurred with Habib Noh, the Saint of Singapore. Now, Singapore is the sort of place and has the sort of government where if they say, okay, I am going to build a road through here, and if they have to break down the National Library building, they will do so, because that's the way progress has been made, and that's the way Singapore went from third world to first world. So whether it's the National Library building or other structures which may be considered important, or heritage structures to others, but once the government makes up its mind, it's very rare that it changes its mind. When the ECP, the East Coast Highway, for those of you who don't live here, was being built, it was to cut through the shrine of this saint, Habib Noh. And the plans were that it was to be bulldozed and destroyed. And now we're going back to several decades. So this is not today where social media was around and people were a little bit freer to protest, etc. Now, the shrine is still standing. The bulldozers actually went and tried to break this down. Oral tradition suggests you can actually go to the shrine, meet people, talk to people. They will tell you that the bulldozers just didn't work when it came time to break down the shrine. Now, I leave it to you to determine whether that's legend or fact, but as I said, we do know that when Singapore wants to break things down, whether it's for a road or get rid of a cemetery, Bukit Brown, or even some of the others, they do so. But this shrine is still standing. Oral tradition will tell you that during World War II, the Japanese bombed the CBD, what is today the CBD area, and they bombed everything and flattened it all around the shrine, but somehow the shrine was left untouched. Again, where legend meets fact, what is fiction, what is true, what is not, I just leave it to you to decide. But there are people who you will meet who will say that, look, if this shrine were ever to be destroyed or his grave ever to be moved, and he wasn't supposed to be buried here, initially he was to be buried somewhere else, and legend has it that because he had said, I want to be buried on the top of Mount Palmer, they couldn't carry his coffin to where his actual burial place had been. So they decided, okay, well, we have to bury him where he said. And there's another legend associated with that, because the land was owned by a Parsi family, and they didn't want to have people buried on the land. So the Muslim community took up a collection, bought the land from the Parsi gentleman, and then buried him. Legend has it, oral tradition suggests that one by one, members of that Parsi family started to die almost immediately after they sold the land. So a few months after they realized something was amiss, they went and they gave the money back to the people who had taken up the collection, and that curse was lifted and they lived happily ever after. So these are the sort of things that I guess humanize the religion and also make it easier for us to believe in things. These are some of the things that help make Sufi Islam a very attractive part of Islam. And I just want to end again with something that speaks to the universal nature of Islam and to the Sufi belief. He is talking about Christians, he's talking about Buddhists and Hindus, he's even, in a sense, putting down Islam. And there is another two lines which I've taken out, which talk about another set of beliefs, just so that I could put everything in. But I made sure to leave the thing about the Kaaba in there so that people realize that, look, when we talk about this universal beliefs and this structure, it's not averse to even questioning what many of us would consider Orthodox Islam. So, thank you very much. I hope it was a useful talk to you. I'm here for questions if people are interested and want to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran, for that very insightful talk. Today is the last day of the festival, but we are packed with activities today, all the way till 9:15. There are 3 programs back to back. So pick up a copy of the festival guide if you don't already have one, and please feel free to approach the speaker for questions. Thank you.
Sure. Yes.
Similarity or difference with Baha'i faith?